What's the biggest Red Sox storyline that's currently flying under the radar going into the season?
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I want to welcome you back into the Locked On Red Sox podcast, and thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen of every single day. I am your host, Jake Ignaszewski, and today I am joined by a very special guest and Red Sox beat writer for the Boston Globe, Alex Speier, and he answers some of the biggest questions going into the Red Sox season, such as could Bryan Mata and Brandon Walter find a way to sneak on to the 26-man roster? What's the biggest storyline that's flying under the radar currently going into the season, and much, much more? Let's listen in to Alex and I's conversation now. One thing that, a lot of fans are really curious about, we've heard about, the vibes. Are they good? Are they bad during spring training? A lot of question marks going into this season. But I was curious, early on in spring training, what's your assessment of the Red Sox thus far going into opening day?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I was only around early in camp. I was down in Fort Myers kind of from around mid-February to late February. As one usually encounters, there's generally good feelings being in the sunshine and being back together after off seasons apart. But beyond that, I think that it would be it's intriguing that they keep winning, even though I do think that that's a relatively meaningless thing in spring. But people generally feel better when there are handshakes at the end of a couple of hours spent on the field than when there's just kind of a slouching back to a clubhouse. So it was fine. I don't think that there was anything. I don't think that there was anything that particularly differentiated it in a good or a bad way. There have only been a couple of spring trainings that I've been around that were truly exceptional. One of which was in 2013, I think. Well, in 2005, that was the first one that was crazy. That one was when every Red Sox player was being asked by New York writers every day how much A-Rod sucked. And literally it was the first 3 weeks of spring featured nothing but that, as well as all of the kind of chaos that followed winning the World Series in 2004. That was a weird spring training in which maybe the sense of collective purpose that had existed in the previous couple of years wasn't quite as well defined after the ultimate thing that they had all been chasing after was achieved. The 2012 spring training was an absolute mess when players were completely distrustful of one another, completely distrustful of Bobby Valentine, wondering what on earth was going on, as a roster had been, there had been some elements of roster shakeup that had entered that year, a whole lot of front office and coaching staff and managerial shakeup going into the season. And that was just weird. Everyone walking around on pins and needles, and that went famously. And then 2013 was notable because of how extreme a departure it was from 2012, where that one was people feeling good about being together and people enjoying each other's company with a lot of loud personalities that kind of played off of each other well. And that was also this strange thing of Jackie Bradley Jr. Being the greatest spring training player in history that year and kind of taking the world by storm. And then I would say that the spring of 2020 was, and I'm not even talking about the COVID shutdown and when everyone was kind of getting concerned about what on earth the world looks like, but the fact that one started with the trade of Mookie Betts and David Price and featured just an absolute enormous amount of turnover on the roster. It started the process of a major overhaul of the roster with a lot of unfamiliar faces. That one was also an exceptional spring training in which people weren't comfortable. But outside of that, this one didn't really, in the time when I was down there, it didn't register as exceptional in those ways.
Yeah, I'm actually good friends with Darnell McDonald, and he told me about Adrian Gonzalez having to hit ground balls to the different fielders and everything like that. And they're like, "What is happening? What is wrong with Bobby Valentine?" And then I heard a story from Kevin Euclid saying that they had snack time during 2012. He's like, are we in preschool? Like, what is this? But we've heard some people trying to compare 2013 to this team with the personalities, sort of the good clubhouse presence. Now, did you really feel that down there at all?
This year or in 2013?
This year.
I didn't get enough of a sense of whether or not, I was still there at a relatively early stage of the spring, but I would say that this spring is very different from 2013 in that there were enormous forceful personalities that remained inside of the Red Sox clubhouse. Chiefly, Dustin Pedroia, who at the end of 2012 played a game on the final day of the season with a broken finger and was yelling, screaming at everyone in the middle of this like god awful season that was miserable for everyone. We're changing the culture here. We're changing the culture, right? Like he was going bananas in game 162 of 2012 and was very determined. Like he's this presence, this huge presence, who has kind of crazy cachet with the team, longstanding. And Ortiz was injured that spring, but he was also an enormous voice of a holdover. And then you also had the just kind of drastic shift of the loathed Bobby Valentine to the John Farrell, who had like rainbows trailing behind him in the eyes of the people around there. So it was easier for some of the bigger voices that were coming on board, like the Johnny Gomez's and the David Rosses and Shane Victorinos, to join in that. This is a very different spring in that the biggest presences in the clubhouse are gone. Kike Hernandez is someone who has over the last few years had a significant role in the clubhouse, but he's taking a different role than the one he's had, right? Whereas the Pedroia and Ortiz roles in 2013 were continuations. So I do think that I think that there's been a generally positive outlook on the part of a number of people. There's a shared sense of no one believes in us, we believe in ourselves type of thing. But I think that the dynamic, to compare it to 2013, which was to this point for me, close to a once in a career clubhouse. I would say that's a little bit of that would be I'm not ready to draw that conclusion at this point.
Right. And I think some of that comparison, I've been faulted to do it a little bit myself, is delusional optimism of just trying to find any way possible to find some sort of positivity after such a negative offseason. And especially with, all the different storylines, all the different question marks going into this season, two words that Lauren and I have said throughout, these past few months is what if and potential, pretty much every single episode. And I'm curious from your vantage point, sort of, looking at the question marks of not only the rotation, the middle infield, everything that goes along with it, is there one storyline in your mind that might be flying under the radar right now?
A little bit difficult to say, given that I've been at home for the last couple of weeks. But, I think that honestly, the centrality of, Masataka Yoshida was signed and then you've kind of forgotten. And yet, there's this fascinating element where, for all of the criticism that the signing took, every statistical projection system that we rely upon to forecast performance seems to be in pretty good agreement that he has a chance to be a really, really good offensive player. So I think that that's a major one, right? There's this question, there is at least a chance that he is a star offensive performer. With potentially with bad defense, that's to be determined, but and without a lot of base running impact. But that's going to go under the radar in some ways because he's not around, and excuse me, and he's trying to kind of make sense and of his new surroundings. But I think that most of the other major storylines are ones of everything is premised on upside, right? In order for the Red Sox to be a contender, you need upside for players. You need players to hit on an upside that's beyond their projections. So you need either Rafael Devers morphing into center super, kind of elite of elite type of superstar, or you need Chris Sale having a bounce back to All-Star / Cy Young form. And how realistic is that? Or you need earlier I was, like, or you need Tristan Casas to come on and be like, Pete Alonso or something like that as a rookie. So I think that it's all known. I think that what if is kind of a reasonable framing mechanism for this team, because that's what it takes. It takes kind of what if as opposed to what is in many ways.
I hope that you are enjoying my conversation with Alex Speier, but I just want to take a second to talk to you about FanDuel. So the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores and threes drained. You can even bet on Celtics, Bruins. They're super hot right now. You can even look into some of the futures regarding the Red Sox. But plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now let's get back into my conversation with Alex Speier. And we're already starting to see those question marks be answered early on in spring training of the, durability of this Red Sox rotation. You see Whitlock, Bayo, Paxton go down early on, and who knows if they're even going to be ready for opening day. And, we had one of our Twitter followers ask, if they aren't ready for opening day, who would be the likely candidates to fill in those spots?
Yeah, they love Cutter Crawford. I think that they feel pretty strongly. First of all, opening day, not the be all end all. That's kind of worth restating. The first couple of weeks of the season, you're able to, you have a bunch of off days, and you'd be in April, you're going to be holding guys back anyway in terms of their innings loads. So that's not the, if those guys are available by mid to late April, then I don't think that that's viewed as being a terribly big impediment. But part of that is because they do have the confidence that they do in Cutter Crawford, who, if you look at kind of that run that he had from beginning of July until about mid-August, who was the last Red Sox homegrown pitcher who you saw having a run like that in the starting rotation, where he was, I think that he had over an 8-start span, he faced 7 teams that ultimately made the playoffs. And over that 8-start span, where he's averaging more than 5 innings an outing, he had an ERA in the low 3s with great strikeout to walk numbers. Like, he showed terrific competitiveness and the ability to adapt an arsenal to a game plan against really good teams. So I think that that's kind of the beyond the 7 identified starters that everyone has said 7 starters. I always thought that, that Cutter Crawford's default was going to be AAA Worcester, but I think that they viewed him as being a big league ready. They view him as being a big league ready starter, who they don't mind going to. And so him, along with, Sale, Kluber, Houck, and Pivetta to open the season seems like a fairly likely alignment, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, his name has been one that has been most talked about to fill in that spot. Josh Winkowski, another guy who could be a possibility as well. But, 2 other pitchers who have been, sort of the talk of spring training thus far. And one of them who's going to be going against Puerto Rico today is Brandon Walter and Bryan Mata as well. And I'm curious from what you see. In my mind, I think that they still need a little bit more time in AAA, especially, with Walter having the next strain to end the season, Mata overcoming, Tommy John surgery. But could you see them find a way to sneak on the 26-man roster?
I would view it as unlikely for both of them to open the season because they need to build up, right? Like, there's if those guys had both been coming off of a season or 2 of 120 minor league innings, if they had Chris Murphy's track, then you would consider them kind of positioning themselves as performers at the beginning of the year. But you, with both of those guys, I think that they are proceeding carefully. This is Mata's first healthy spring since 2020, and that one was not even a full spring. So I think that they really, really want to let him develop in AAA over the course of, we'll see how long, but I think that he's going to position himself as a pitcher of interest, and whether or not that's in the rotation or the bullpen, I'm not sure yet. But certainly, the ease of getting to power stuff is noteworthy, although he doesn't get swings and misses with mid to high 90s. So that's also worth noting. And he really has to be on his game with his secondaries. Walter it looks a lot healthier than he did at any point last year. He's been working at 91 to 93, whereas last spring I saw him and I've been very intrigued to see him, on the backfields, and he was working at 88 to 90, maybe touching a 91 then. And it was like, oh, that's different. He was still looking great on the backfields against minor league competition, but the velocity was down from the beginning of spring training, whereas this year he's well ahead of where he was at any point physically in the 2022 season.
Especially with all the young talent that the Sox do have, it's really easy for fans to get excited and a little bit overzealous about wanting see these guys on a regular basis playing in Boston. And Manuel Valdez is another player who has really caught a lot of eyes from fans. And one of our followers, Ken Matias, he said, could Valdez have a chance to make the Red Sox roster as well?
It's a kind of never say never trajectory, but I think that the odds are stacked against him unless, barring an injury to if Arroyo gets injured, or if Kike were to be injured, one of those two regular middle infielders, then it might be a consideration. But as a backup option, you don't want a player at his career point to be kind of getting part-time work in a backup role. And he also lacks the defensive versatility that you would ideally want from a bench contributor. So I think that there's a reason why they re-signed Yu Chang. And I think that there's a pretty good chance that he would be ahead of Valdez on the depth chart. But certainly, I think that Valdez has been nothing but impressive in his offensive approach, granted in the earliest days of spring, which are the worst for evaluating hitters, because the only question is is your bat ready for fastballs, or for, no one is pitching to game plans at this point. Pitchers aren't really trying to command so much as they're trying to build arm strength at this point. So the first couple of weeks of spring until you get to, the latter half of March tend to be a terrible time to start evaluating where hitters are at.
That makes sense. And, this year compared to others, I see a lot more openings in the Red Sox roster, from Ramel Tapia, Jorge Alfaro, the ability to be able to make the roster signing on a minor league deal. And, we have PD43. He said, other than, a backup catcher and Ref Schneider, who will be the two other reserves when the regular season starts?
Yeah, I think that you're looking. So let's assume that Justin Turner, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? That was a horrific moment, but for so many reasons, it would be great to see him not slowed in his progression towards the season. Keep those chiclets. So I think that you're looking at a bench to open the season of Alfaro, Ref Snyder, Chang, and my guess would be Tapia over Jarren Duran, but I think that could go in a different direction. But that would be, as things stand, as we talk in early March, that would be my kind of default presumption. And now 6 guys are going to get injured, so it'll be all shaken up.
I think the March 25th date as well is really important as well, with the causes for Tapia as well as Alfaro on if the Sox will, ultimately add them to the 40-man roster, or if, another team could potentially, pick them up. And, one thing that we've seen early on is seeing, not only the Red Sox, but different teams adapting to the new rules. And, especially with how, the pitch clock violation ultimately had a game end, on a strikeout. That was definitely an interesting way to start off, spring training with the new pitch clock. But we saw Chris Sale struggle with it a little bit, Tanner Houck struggle with it a little bit 2 days ago. And I'm curious from what you've seen or heard from how the coaching staff is helping these players get comfortable with the new rules, specifically the pitch clock.
Yeah, well, I mean, there have been clocks all over the backfields, and they are everything this spring. Once they got there, it wasn't like they were going to say, okay, this will be cool, we'll check it out in games. Everything of every bullpen session, every live batting practice session has been with a clock in sight of pitchers and hitters, in order to get everyone used to kind of paying attention to this different framework in which you have to get the ball and go, or you have to get in the box and be ready. And I think that, it's not a seamless adaptation, but, I don't know, I went to a bunch of minor league games last year, and, and all that I would show up at a park, and everyone, and this isn't necessarily uniform personnel, but everyone in the park would be like, have you been to a game with a pitch clock yet? It's so fast. It's so good. People love it from a fan and spectating standpoint. And I think that, as the number of violations of it dwindled to the point where it was almost irrelevant. I would not be paying, my eyes were not affixed after the first couple of innings of a minor league game towards the end of the year to the pitch clock, because it just wasn't a relevant consideration. Like, pitchers were working faster than the clock required them to.
And it was interesting to see Ryan Fitzgerald's tweet speaking about that he feels like the pitch clock is a little bit faster from the minors, because I saw it 2 years ago with the New Hampshire Fish Cats, and then last year obviously with the Woo Sox, and I feel like it's a little bit faster just from the videos that I've seen of I remember seeing a 20-second strikeout. Couldn't believe that.
Yeah, it's different. Like, we're seeing a bunch of 2.5-hour games in the spring. The pace of it is the pace of it is different. I think that it is. I think that the level of vigilance that umpires have been instructed to enforce it with is different than it was in the minors, even last year. That like they decide that Major League Baseball was tinkering with the idea. Okay, do we kind of like ease into it and let people get used to it for a little while? And they said, no, we are going to start out with with sirens blaring as soon as anyone starts violating this stuff, because you don't want to have guys easing into it. You want them to be ready come opening day, for there to be as few mistakes as possible regarding this new way of playing baseball.
I'm laughing because it just makes me think of the foreign substance, and Sergio Romo taking his pants off, and Max Scherzer like just taking his jersey off and everything like that. But I get it. They got to force it immediately to help not only fans, coaches, but also players to ultimately get used to it. But one thing that I was really intrigued about is one of our Twitter followers, March Mazinis. She said, "What's the best part of being a beat writer? Why? And what's the worst part, and why?"
The best part of it is getting to learn stuff, finding out stuff, that being in a position to ask questions or see things that make me go, oh, I didn't know that. And that opportunity on a regular basis, whether it's through conversations with players, whether it's conversations through other beat writers, conversations with front office members, or just being able to see the field, like especially at spring training, as at the time of year spring training, where you get this incredible vantage point, one that's shared with any fans who are in spring training facilities, but this incredible proximity to the game where you're only a few feet away from the action, rather than kind of being at the remove of the press box, is fantastic. And people are also relatively unguarded thus at this time of year about kind of themselves, right? Like, so you can find out about people and learn about people. I think that's the fun of it, right? Like, the opportunity to be surprised and to learn and to enjoy things that are different. That's what's good about the beat. You're on it day after day after day after day. So you're looking for the things that change, not the ones that are necessarily the same over and over and over. That would be kind of lame. And the worst part is, I guess that twofold. The amount of time that I spend away from my family is at the top of the list. And I have a 12-year-old son and a 9-year-old son, and a lot falls on my wife with with their day-to-day existences, and I feel like a bad parent sometimes. So that's pretty high on the list of things that aren't great about the beat, along with it's tiring. Like, the days start as soon as if the Red Sox are at home and I'm covering a home game, like, the workday starts almost as quickly as my sons are walk through the school door, and it finishes after midnight. And that's that can be tiring, but there's also moments of exhilaration in the middle of that.
Yeah, and that's something that Lauren and I talk about a lot on this podcast is the work-life balance of the sports industry. And one thing that we like to do
everywhere. It's not just the sports industry, right? Like,
True.
It's hard. Like, it's hard. We have it's way too easy to engage your work. Like, your work follows you in your pocket, and that's just made it hard to be a healthy human being. Probably harder than it's in some ways. In some ways harder than it's been in other eras, but in other ways it's far easier to be healthy than it has been in other eras, and we shouldn't take that for granted either.
Couldn't agree more. And, one last thing for you, it's especially, early on in spring training, it's easy to get highs and lows. And especially, with overall Boston fans, if one loss happens, oh my God, it's the end of the world. The season's over. If one win happens, oh my God, we're going to the World Series. And especially with this team, I feel like fans are just trying to keep the vibes as high as possible, especially with, as I mentioned before, how negative the offseason was. So, from your vantage point with how you see this team currently, how do you think, Red Sox fans should, or what mindset do you think that they should have going into the season?
I think, I guess if I suppose it depends on, I would never prescribe what someone's mindset should be. I think that, as a fan, I think back to my own experience as a fan where I grew up in the DC area following the Orioles, who were generally wretched while I was growing up. Like the first year I ever followed baseball, they won the World Series, but then they were a bad team for most of the years after that before I went off to college. And, I nonetheless that, the sense of open-mindedness to exactly the question that you're talking about, the what if, if you're, I guess what fun is it to follow a team if you are simply going to spend all of your time dwelling on worst case scenarios? I guess that there is satisfaction in expertise. If you think about a cultural critic like Theodore Adorno of about 100 years ago, he always talked about he would write about the sports spectator as being able to maintain critical distance in a way from theater performances and from spectacle in a way that allowed them to criticize. So that's a cool way to enjoy sports. But at the same time, I think that with sports specifically, what people generally want to see is transcendence and the opportunity for surprises, usually in a positive direction. So if you're a fan of the Red Sox, and my job isn't to be a fan, my job is just to document them. So I'm in a different boat. But if you're a fan of the Red Sox, what you look for is is the sense of possibility and the idea of oh, what if I do get to exactly what you say, what if Chris Sale is suddenly unleashing 96, 97, 98 miles an hour, climbing the ladder with that delivery from hell for left-handed hitters, and what would it look like if Tristan Casas is the kind of player that people believe he can be? It's
right.
And then just being open-minded to surprise is kind of an interesting and generally more enjoyable way of going through life.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to look at it. And how I'm going into it is don't get too high on the highs and don't get too low on the lows. Because, even back in, 2021, going into the All-Star break, the Sox had the best record in baseball. And then, we obviously know what ended up, happening in August with the COVID-19 outbreak. And then, even last year, June, they were unreal. And then, the injuries just ended up crippling them. But I'm really curious to see ultimately how it all plays out. But really appreciate you taking the time, Alex. And for anybody that wants to, check out your articles, check out your Twitter and see all the amazing work that you do, how can they see that?
I write for the Boston Globe. So, the Boston Globe's sports section online is a great way to do so. And I'm at Alex Speier. So pretty straightforward Twitter handle that has no inventiveness whatsoever.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Alex. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Jake.
I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Alex Speier and got some of the questions that you might have had going into this episode answered by him. And even if you have some more, make sure to let us know over on Twitter, because we're going to be speaking with RedSoxMLB.com writer Ian Brown tomorrow. So make sure to tweet us over there when I ultimately make a tweet saying, what questions do you have or what topics do you want me to talk to Ian about? I'll make sure to include those in tomorrow's episode. But we're going to continue to be bringing on tons of different guests leading into the season to help you not only stay updated about the Boston Red Sox, but also to help you be as knowledgeable as possible regarding the team. So if you have not yet, make sure to subscribe over on YouTube or whatever audio platform that you listen to. Also, as I mentioned, make sure to follow us over on Twitter. It's LO_Red Sox. Myself, it's at Jake Iggy. And also my co-host, Lauren. It's la 3 laws, Lauren with 4 R's. But buckle up, like I said, and get excited for another great interview with Red Sox writer from MLB.com, Ian Brown, tomorrow. So tune in to tomorrow's episode to check out that. But as always, we greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope that you have a great rest of your day. And we'll end it how we always end it. Keep the faith and let's go Sox. Peace.